So, hey, John, how are you today? It's nice to sit down and have a chat with you today for our tech summit here. I'm really happy that you were able to join us.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm love to chat about stuff anyway, so it's a good time.
Yeah, why don't we do a quick little intro for everybody who's watching the audience? So I'm Rob Owen. I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Architect for CDI. So I'm responsible for all technical pre-sales at the company. And I've been here for 10 years, and it's been a great partnership that we've had with Pure over the years. I'm fortunate to sit on your technology board. We've had a lot of great conversations over the years, and really excited to talk to you a little bit about some of the things we're gonna get into today around hybrid cloud and what you guys are doing in the container space specifically.
Yeah, and I'll introduce myself. I'm John Owings. I am the Director for Cloud Architecture at Pure Storage. That includes the pre-sales teams for Portworx. And so I've been at Pure for 7.5 years, which in Pure years is like 70 anywhere else, right? But
Yeah.
no, but I've been around from flash array days all the way to now, and so it's been exciting to see kind of the transition towards cloud native and all the new opportunities that are there.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to get into this kind of storyline that I think is pretty ubiquitous in the marketplace, right? And you've kind of lived through it on your side, right? Having gone from the early days of Pure to now and watching the whole evolution of this space. So it's a perfect time, I think, to talk about it. But before we get into that, I think we have to address the fact how close our last names are and how we both suffer from the no one ever being able to get our last name right, right? So you're Owings, I'm Owen. And I think you often get Owen and I often get Owens. So
Yes, I get Owens, I get Owen, and then I have the double curse because I'm John without an H, and so
uh,
I also will never have my first name spelled right. Say John, I'll say Jon, and they'll still write John. So it's always
so
fun.
it's we both have that same issue when we go to Starbucks and try to get a coffee,
Yeah,
right?
just tell them my name's Fred, and and we're fine.
I got to do that. That's pretty funny. So kind of getting into it, right? You know, on our side, we've been really excited about some of the acquisitions that Pure has made. And like I mentioned before, you guys being a strategic partner of ours, just in the data kind of management and storage space, it was really great. And when I got an early preview of the Portworx acquisition and kind of how that was going to play into your product portfolio, I know I was really excited, and a lot of the guys and gals on our side from a technical sales perspective were really excited about it because we're getting asked a lot of questions almost on a daily basis about what Kubernetes is going to look like for people. And quite honestly, what we've seen, and I think we can certainly chat more about, is that there's a big people problem in the market, right? The conceptually, the idea of containerizing applications makes a ton of sense, but the people problem that exists is that there's a lack of technical ability out in the marketplace today, right? So
Yeah.
because technology has gotten kind of brought down to a generalist level in a lot of ways, and I can use my own experience from this, right? I grew up in the storage arena, and back in the day, you really needed a PhD to be able to design the really high end storage arrays. And as technologies like VMware and Pure and others have come to be kind of the de facto stance in the marketplace, what we've seen is the concept of a true specialist has kind of become less and less relevant to the average IT generalist. So the IT generalist used to be a very specialized person, right? If you were a storage administrator even 5 years ago, you were highly specialized, right? You probably didn't know a ton about a lot of the other spaces. And as the technologies have gotten easier and easier to consume and use in the space, and a lot of automation and API driven work has happened, your average IT generalist has become more of a GUI operator who wears many hats versus a truly specialized person. So I'd be curious what your thoughts there are in terms of how Portworx is playing a role in kind of making the consumption and actual productizing of containers more simplified versus you needing a PhD to kind of convert your applications from monolithic to broken up into micro containers or services, however you want to put it.
Yeah. Well, luckily, I mean, Portworx from the very beginning was built to make containers storage simpler, right? Like you could do it 5 years ago, but you really had to you had to jump through a lot of hoops, and you really had to know what was going on. So by bringing kind of that layer, so Portworx is a software solution. It brings that management into Kubernetes. So if I'm if I'm a user of Kubernetes, I'm deploying applications. All I need to know is I want 10 gigs of storage, and the rest is handled for me. Right? Where this applies to making that, it's just like the flash array, right? It was made for all flash. We made it super simple, right? And then you could go work. We always told people that like 7 years ago. Well, when you stop having to write like insane CLI scripts in order to provision a LUN, you can go learn something that may or may not be way more important to the business. And we see, I think we're actually seeing that happen now in the storage space, in the VM space, where at least in my experience from customers I've talked to, the storage / VMware sysadmins are now getting tasked with go learn Kubernetes or go figure this out for the company. And so everyone's getting wider. And that's not just me from eating during COVID, but like, knowledge wise,
I actually lost weight. So
I wish I worked out more, but I ate more too. So it didn't really matter.
Yeah. But I think that really kind of validates some of our position, which is, there's a lot of retraining that's having to happen, right? And the developers aren't infrastructure people, and the infrastructure people aren't developers. And companies like CDI, I think, play a very important role in bridging those two gaps, right? And becoming really consultative in the space, and not only helping people on the technology side, but also giving people roadmap in terms of how they should be retraining some of their workforce to prepare for the days coming, right? And the day is now, right? We're seeing it in some of our most, our marquee accounts, where people are really looking at deploying containers, not just in labs and in development spaces, but like, what is the plan going to be for once we refactor our applications for containers? How are we going to make this production and still follow the same rules that we have around high availability and backup? So as it relates to Portworx, I know you guys have a pretty unique offering around your PX backup. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, PX backup, is the best way to put it is application centric, right? Like you can point it at a namespace in Kubernetes and say, get my app, right? And it will get the deployment files, the metadata, and the data, and put them all in a place where where you can restore them. And what's nice is it's completely encapsulated in the target has to be an object store, so it could be the cloud, or it could be a FlashBlade, or whatever you like. But at that point, like if I happen to delete my whole on-prem infrastructure, if I can at least get back to that object store, I can restore it and everything I need to run that app, right? I'm not worried about restoring infrastructure at this point. Like that's how we've always worried before. That's why I said app centric. It's like just get some, get a managed Kubernetes cluster back up and hit restore, and you're ready to go, right? So you're not like, oh well, how to restore my VLANs and my like that stuff we worried about 10 years ago. Like how do I get my VLANs back and my all my SAN zones and everything? Like, oh no, just take the app, put it, and that's what the end user eventually really cares about, and that's what PX Backup's made to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I see people struggling with, right? It's like we have all these SLAs and rules around our data compliance, right? The business expects that if we, to your point, if we lose infrastructure, that within an RTO of X, we're going to get that data back, and we're also going to get an RPO of X back in terms of how much data loss we would expect, right? So simplifying backup is kind of one step to ease the concerns of maybe less technical people, like C-level people. They think in this traditional way, which is I have a set of infrastructure that provides applications out, which is hopefully revenue generating for the business in some way or another. And if I have a catastrophic event, that I know that the business is kind of guaranteed back from an IT perspective that we'll be back up and running in a certain amount of time.
I think those to interrupt just a second, those C-level people, you expect that to already be there.
Right.
And it's not in Kubernetes. That's why Portworx and PX Backup are so unique, is because it answers those things that we all just expected our traditional solutions to do, and that have not been made for Kubernetes. So that's why it's really nice to have something made specifically for those solutions.
Right. And I think, from my perspective, that's a major value add, right? Versus a lot of the competitive landscape. It seems to be less mature. I'll say it that way, right? There's very little competitive offering in this space, and this kind of makes Pure, with the Portworx acquisition, a much more compelling, offering to customers that are really trying to make this journey to a container-based, an agile development platform. And the same is true, kind of in the same vein around the idea of regionality, right? So traditionally we would talk about business continuance versus DR versus backup, right? What are the actual values of each one of those? And some people will do all three, some people do two of the three, right? But in a traditional IT model, you definitely have backups and you definitely have some kind of failover model, right? Whether it's active or asynchronous. And that plays into your RPO strategy of how fast can I get things back and at what point in time. And then traditionally the backup becomes kind of your last line of defense if everything else goes wrong, or you've only lost some specific piece of the infrastructure. So can we talk a little bit about how Pure and Portworx does things in a hybrid way, right? So how do you guys handle, the on-prem versus off-premise and or even just the cloud in general around what happens if I'm running my Portworx in one particular cloud and that region has an outage, right? How do you guys work through that, and what are kind of the differentiators there for you guys?
Yeah, so obviously there's a pretty unique way to address that with Portworx, is that we can now basically like stretch clustering we did in VMware with other vendors back in the day. We do it with active cluster and FlashArray now. But now we can actually stretch the Kubernetes data plane over availability zones. So I could say, hey, if AZ1 dies in AWS, all my data, 0 RPO is in another one. Of course, that 0 RPO requires, if you're in the same cloud, you have very low latency between them. But like, let's say I want to do that on-prem, from rack to rack, right? It enables that as well. So what's more likely in a data centers, someone's going to accidentally turn off the power, kick the power out of a row, right? And so if you build that rack redundancy, and Portworx is able to recognize that through topology, through the stretch clustering, a few of those technologies are just built into Portworx. Now I can actually have that protection there, but then also extend that to a hybrid scenario where I'm now on-prem or in the cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, the one you like the most.
Right.
And it just comes down to, if you want 0 RPO, like obviously we want low latency. If you're okay with some asynchronous type replication, right, we can do that as well. And it's just, it's something that adds to what you can do in Kubernetes, right? Like, because Kubernetes doesn't have that concept. Like, it was originally made for ephemeral workloads where, well, there's no data, so I could always hit restart somewhere else. But now that data is following those containers everywhere, we got to make sure the data is everywhere. And that's why I'm probably talking too long, but
it's great.
Is that data plane that comes from Portworx, I'm selfish, but like, on-prem, like if it's on Pure, that's great, right? But it could be some other storage as well, because that layer is common. And now I can actually replicate or use that same data plane in the cloud and have the same services, same replication, and I may have heterogeneous infrastructure in 3 different places, and it's going to be okay, right? Because Portworx will make that data go wherever the container goes, which is nice. Whether that's just for I want to have hybrid cloud or I want to have DR, business continuity type solutions. So it's the, underneath in the covers, it's all the same technology, kind of like the replication and all that, but it's actually, a unique and really nice thing that you can add to your environment that I would say most of, my background being from VMware
Right.
is you kind of expected that to be there. And so having to add something on there really helps.
Yeah, and we'll get more into that, like VMware and how you guys play together in a second, but still on this kind of backup and availability conversation, I think, what we've seen, and, myself and Will Huber, our CTO here, have spent a lot of time kind of debating this early on as Kubernetes kind of it started becoming more and more popular, was how soon persistent storage would become a thing, right? Mm-hmm. So to your point, early on, most consumers of early adopters, I'll say, of Kubernetes didn't care about it, right? But being who we are and consulting with the kind of vast array of verticals that we talk to, right? We have far fewer customers that have non-persistent storage than have persistent.
Yeah.
So our view was that over time, and we didn't think it would take long, and clearly we're kind of there, that if there was to be a wide adoption of containers as a kind of platform for next generation technology, that persistent storage would become an issue. And then all these kind of legacy factors would play a big impact in how people adopted it, right? So without the ability to do backups, right, which we talked about, and the ability to do replication, there would be hesitation from less technical people, decision makers, and even C-suite, and of a lot of our clients to trust the technology, right? And when there's a low level of trust, as we've seen, in the history of IT, right? VMware, which we just brought up, is a good example of this, right? In 2004, I would spend a lot of time convincing people that VMware actually brought a lot more layers of availability to their applications than they had on bare metal. But it still took people years to believe that story, right?
I remember having to teach my CIO throughout that time, hey, he's like, but we could lose all our servers if this one server reboots. I was like, but they'll all restart somewhere else.
Right.
And he's like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, now they're just software. So yeah.
I was going back a long time, I was a beta tester of VMware 1.0. And when we saw the initial releases of VMware, which were nowhere near what they are today, obviously, the biggest concern we have was, and at the time, commoditized server technology was even way less reliable than it is now. And I remember actually saying at some of those meetings, like, you're telling me you want to run 5 servers on one physical machine, so now I'm going to have 5 people calling and screaming at me when the server dies versus 1? That seems like a terrible idea. I don't think anyone will ever buy this. Well, boy, was I wrong, right? And then I think in about 6 months later, they came and they showed us, vMotion and HA, and we were all doing the "we're not worthy" kind of bow in the room, and said, this is game-changing technology. So obviously the world has accepted, hypervisor level virtualization as, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Every single customer we have is over 80%, unless they're highly specialized for some reason or another on some bare metal application. But most generalized workloads exist as a VM today.
Absolutely.
So how are you guys playing in the sandbox with companies like VMware? I know that we're obviously out there talking to people about Tanzu almost every day now, and there's a lot of interest in it because it also brings a lot of this kind of legacy requirement to the next generation container platform. How do you guys interact? How do you guys play together in that space?
Well, because Portworx was made for basically if you run like a Kubernetes kernel, like I consider that a kernel, even though technically it's not, but like Portworx fits in. So Tanzu, any of those versions, like, so initially we started off supporting, PKS, right? So one of our biggest customers uses PKS. Well, obviously that's transitioning to, they renamed it to TKGI. We support, the Tanzu TKG, and now we just announced it at our show at the beginning of May, but support for Tanzu service, which is that embedded version. So if it's running Kubernetes, like Portworx will run. And some of the things is really just getting validation, like getting in the VMware's lab and saying, here's the thing, it's made for containers. It will naturally just make Tanzu better.
Right.
And getting VMware to give us the green, the green check box, right? So that's there for all the Tanzu flavors, which I'm excited about, because I think like there's a huge amount of customers that have been waiting to see what VMware does,
Right.
with this, and how successful, because they may be daunted by cloning the Kubernetes repo and like starting to build binaries for the kubelet and and all those things. They're like, hey, I just want it to be like what I normally do, and I right click and enable Kubernetes, and I'm ready to go, right?
Yeah.
And to have
Simple, right? And that kind of wraps the whole story we're telling here, right?
Yeah.
Is people are looking for more simplicity in what can be a very complicated rollout, right? And adaptation, right? And the developers are going to do this whether IT keeps up or not. So it's our job as IT consultants and specialists and experts to help enable our client base not only take advantage of their existing investments, but make really smart investments in the next generation of technology they do that carries it all forward, right? And my view, and I think we agree on this, is that products like Portworx and Tanzu, the better they play together and the simpler they make it from back to the people problem, right? If we can solve that and inject intelligent software in to take our existing IT generalists and retrain them into the new world, then we kind of solve that problem, right? We're not out looking for the PhD who lives in Silicon Valley, who's done Kubernetes since day one, who's in very high demand and probably costs a lot of money. We can now start to make this more of a generalized implementation and leverage the skill sets we already have in our employee base, right?
Yeah, and we're not trying to, and we're not replacing something that VMware already does. We're adding to it. So I tell every customer that asks about Tanzu, like, if you want to run prod in Tanzu, Portworx is going to enable HADR backup simply, right? Where you're not going to have to get a PhD in it, and they're like sold, like, I want to do it, right? So I'm really excited about seeing that. Like, short story that when the VMware announced Pacific, right, and Pat Gelsinger was still CEO, right? It was 2 years ago, and they announced that, like,
has it been that long?
Yeah, I know. It's I think it's been 2 years since that VMworld, because it was a real one. We were all there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And,
You're right.
and I'm telling this story not because like I talk to Charlie Giancarlo all the time, but he did come up like into the Pure booth, which I was working at because that's what I do. And he said, "So what are the big announcements?" I said, "Kubernetes. VMware announced they're going all in on Kubernetes. It's going to be a big deal, right?" And he said, "Okay." And he kind of, and then he went on and started talking to other people, and you could see, like, I think, when VMware went all in, we saw that as an opportunity. Like, this is where the industry is going. Like, this is not going to vaporize in a year.
No.
And so I'm really excited about where we're going with this, with everything we're doing around cloud native.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think CDI's position is very clear on this, and we've spent a tremendous amount of time and energy in our own staffing to train up on these next generation technologies. We're master competencies with VMware around cloud and Tanzu, and we're obviously at the highest levels of partnership with you guys and working heavily on that. So we're getting involved in those conversations more and more every day, and we're starting to see people actually put it into practice. And it's just a natural fit, right? If you're heavily invested in VMware, and you don't have the luxury of starting over again from scratch, which very few people do, it's just a natural transition, and it's going to make this kind of people problem we talked about now for.
And so many customers are needing someone to tie it all together, like you, that can take, these concepts that, hey, what do I, because I've had them ask, like, what version should I use? There's like 50 of them. And how am I going to take this? What do I need to do about security, which is something we didn't even talk about yet, right? And storage. Like I will focus on storage all day. Let someone smarter than me handle security. But like, how do we pull all those things together? So someone like you guys that can pull all that in one place, customers, I think will find amazingly valuable.
Yeah, I mean, we just held a security summit, very recently, and a tremendous amount of feedback on that was very good. You know, we're heavily investing in that space as well. But back to kind of the Portworx stuff here. I know you guys have some really some key clients that you and I have talked about in the past. One being Roblox. So I have a 6.5-year-old son who, if he had his way, would probably play Roblox from the moment he woke up until the moment he went to sleep. And I've actually used this story with him to kind of explain what I do, right? What I'm doing in this office all day long. He's very confused. He's like, "You're always talking to people on video. What are you doing all day?" And the other day I was like, you know what? This is gonna click. And I told him, hey, you know that game you love to play, Roblox? Well, guess what? That's a big part of what I do, right? As I work with a company that has enabled them, and you guys have a really cool story, through the pandemic of how you guys helped them. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of their architects told us a story when I guess March in 2020, when they got a whole year's worth of users in 1 month.
Right.
And if they could not scale like they can with containers and Portworx, he said they would have it wouldn't have happened. Like they would have gone down.
Right.
That's not the exact. I don't remember the exact word he said, but it would have been bad. He said so.
I mean, that's crazy though to think like
Yeah.
they literally, because now everyone's from home and people are probably trying to get some relief from their kids.
All of us that are trying to work, all of us, like, hey, you finished your at-home school, right? Like,
Right.
okay, go play. They're on the iPad, because it supports everything, right? It's
Yep.
iPad, PC, whatever. So like, yeah, go play Roblox.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I don't play it myself a lot, but I see it, and it's definitely it's super kid friendly. I mean, just to watch my son, who probably a year ago couldn't have played any of these games, now like literally showing me how to play Roblox and how it all works, and he's constantly asking me to go buy him Robux. I'm like, no, you gotta figure that out without that. But
buy more Robux so they could buy more Portworx. So
right,
that's how it works.
But that's a great story. I mean, clearly,
absolutely,
a lot of value
that scale
there.
is important. Yeah.
Yeah. How about T-Mobile? I know that they're another kind of marquee client you guys have in this space. How have you guys kind of helped them? And I know that they're a big Pure partner in general.
Yeah, so they've done obviously some webinars and some things publicly with us, but I mean they went from, basically how do we solve for this scale issue when, for example, like if a new phone launches and everyone's trying to order at once, like how do you take all those orders?
Right.
That's what Kubernetes is made for. Like scale the front end, scale the back end. Let's not go down. And they implemented Kubernetes and Pure, and I think it's on VMware, right? So all those things together with Portworx, they were able to address that for their stateful workloads. Where and at one point there was a launch and there were 0 hiccups, right? Right in order taking, which is revenue to them, right? So that's extremely important. So they were able to get new customers on, activate new phones, all that stuff, and it worked like a champ. So I mean, they'd run lots of other things on there. They do have quite a few different Kubernetes environments as they work on developing new things. But that's the one example I think we could all relate to, because we've all been on some site and you're like trying to like fill the shopping cart and then it like says 503 and you're like, oh yeah, like, well, I guess I won't buy today, and then that's lost money.
Or you're like, did I buy it or did I not buy it?
I bought it 10 times. That's horrible.
Yeah, and now you spend 40 minutes on the phone getting through a phone tree to get there, right?
Yeah.
Which it's a whole
cancel all of them but one. Yes.
So if I were to kind of wrap this up here, coming up on our time, I would say that Portworx is really doing a couple of really key things here, right? And I think the overarching theme here is the simplification, right? Solving that people problem, getting Kubernetes into the hands of the IT generalists to go and solve gap between developers and the traditional IT, and then kind of making sense of that to the C-level suite so that they feel comfortable in the investment, right?
Yep.
And you're doing that by enabling some of the things that matter now in the modern world, right? That carry from the legacy, which is backup, disaster recovery and availability, right? Truly being hybrid, being able to have a on-premise and leverage existing investment on-prem, also leveraging hyperscalers with AWS and Azure, kind of your choice, right? Or being all in, right? If you're born in the cloud or you're developing new applications, you don't need to use the legacy infrastructure, right? But you can still carry over some of those legacy concepts with you. And then clearly you've got some really good partnerships with key integrators like CDI, who are out there kind of pushing the message, and you're enabling us to really go out and consult and make this kind of dream a reality for our customers.
Yep.
So I think with that, I'll thank you for your time today. This was a great conversation. I know you and I, we talk a lot, so it'll be great to get involved in some more opportunities. Hopefully, with some people watching this today.
That's what we're here for. Me, my team, we're ready, to help customers understand this, try it out. Like, there's a way to do it. There's free trials, right, for Portworx. It's awesome. It's software, so you can just go download it.
And I'll say, John, you're proof that this is a reality, right? You came from the traditional IT background and storage, and have evolved your own career over the last 7 years at Pure to now you're a thought leader in the space. And guys like me, working for a large integrator like CDI, are coming to you for your expertise and guidance on how we should be going to market with our clients. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for thank you for the acknowledgement. Yes, it's not.
Yeah, you are. I mean, it's clear. you guys are doing stuff that other people aren't doing, and it separates you, and it's why we're thankful to have the partnership with you guys.
Definitely. So yeah, and anything you need, like, we're here for you. That's
cool,
what we're
man.
here for.
All right. Well, with that, I thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found this valuable, and look to some of our other sessions today, as I'm sure they'll be great.
Definitely. Thank you.